Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Squarespace. The Rolex on my wrist is pretty unusual for a modern watch. The Rolex on my wrist is pretty expensive. The Rolex on my wrist has been discontinued and it is pretty widely hated. So for an entire look, a real 3,000-foot view into this watch and why I think it's just totally misunderstood and absolutely fantastic, stay tuned for today's video. I guess where we should start is in 2006. 2006 was the first year that Rolex had not manufactured a Pepsi GMT since 1954. That's pretty bold. 1954, Rolex introduced the GMT Master in collaboration with Pan American Airlines with an entirely new complication, the Greenwich Mean Time, a watch that was capable of telling 2 times simultaneously, but a third very quickly on the run. It was perfect for and marketed to pilots and the jet set. It was popularized in a James Bond film with the character Pussy Galore, not to mention Magnum PI and a whole host of other pieces of culture. The Pepsi bezel by Rolex and their GMT Master really is one of the most iconic color combinations or pieces of design in all of watchmaking history. I really think that that's true. So in 2006, when Rolex decided to no longer manufacture what has essentially been an icon, a gravy train, a pillar of the brand, just as important and as synonymous as the Day-Date bracelet, the presidential bracelet, it was to quite a bit of surprise. See, that was the year that Rolex introduced the ceramic GMT, and they manufactured it in black on a stainless steel case. This is a great watch. I think they were highly, highly undervalued for a very long time. You can get one around $7,000, and now those prices have gone up, and rightfully so, because those green GMT hands are just gorgeous. These are great watches, okay? But this was all new at the time. This idea of the super case, the beefed up case, now commonplace for Rolex. In fact, modern Rolex wearers, I think, wince at the idea of a, pre-ceramic Rolex, right? They can't believe that Rolexes used to be, while still 40 millimeters, smaller in aluminum, right? This was essentially the beginning of a whole new modern chapter for the brand. But in that new chapter, the Pepsi was not written in. In fact, from 2006 till 2014, Rolex did not manufacture a single Pepsi bezel. That's like Coke discontinuing Coke, for God's sakes. Could you imagine, right? So the world was begging for a Pepsi, naturally, right? The world wanted their thirst quenched, but it wasn't happening. But then, in 2014, Rolex finally released the Pepsi bezel, but they didn't release it in stainless steel like the world wanted. They exclusively released it in solid 18-karat white gold, making it, rather expensive, right? You're taking what would have historically been a $10,000 sports watch, or at the time maybe a $9,000 sports watch, and manufacturing it only for $40,000, right? Essentially making it unapproachable for even upper middle class people, right? Really just making it totally out of reach. Keeping in mind, watch culture and the proportion to your income that was normal to spend on watches 10 years ago was very different. Since that COVID boom, people have blown fortunes on watches that you never would have imagined just 10 or 15 years ago. Okay, fine. So why did Rolex wait so long? Maybe they were playing a little marketing move. Maybe they were doing a little bit of a cat and mouse game. That's possible. But there were always rumors about Rolex's difficulty in producing these bezels that circulated. And what would come next affirmed those rumors or seemed to affirm those rumors. You see, this bezel that was introduced in 2014 on these white gold GMT Masters was a very bright red and blue. No one seemed to ask for those colors to be changed. No one seemed to think anything of it. But not so long after, a Mark II came, and a Mark III and a Mark IV. 3 more versions in succession to the GMT Pepsi bezel, right? 3 different color variations, still blue and red, yes, but all different, and they seem to get darker by the mark. So the watch world asked a question. Well, one, they said, is this happening or am I crazy? Did these watches get darker? Does his look different? It was very confusing to everybody. But Instagram and researchers affirmed, certainly, that there were these different marks, which Rolex never affirmed on their own. This was all done by private collectors and enthusiasts. Okay, so they certainly did change it. We know that. So the next question is, why? Well, some said it was because the reaction to these bright Mark I bezels was negative. No one liked these bezels, so Rolex darkened them by the version and over those next 3 versions. But then other rumors started flurrying. Rumors that Rolex was having a very difficult time manufacturing these bezels. It was even said that 1 out of every 60 Rolex Pepsi ceramic bezels made it through to the end user. That 59 out of 60 had to be discarded, that they didn't meet the quality standards. So Rolex was constantly changing their recipe, for lack of a better word. Fast forward to 2023. Rumors started flurrying that Rolex was going to discontinue the Pepsi. This is totally independent from the different color marks, right? But rather that the Pepsi was no longer a viable production model. They couldn't meet their desired quantity, production quantity. That's a pretty wild thing to think about. Rolex, the largest machine in watchmaking. They make 1.2, 1.3 million watches a year, right? They're the best. They're not able to make their iconic Pepsi bezel, right? What an odd situation, right? And now we find out that Rolex has applied for the patent for their new Coke bezel, and that for the last several years, they've had extreme difficulty in finding that, for lack of a better term, recipe to make their Coke. It's pretty amazing and confusing a little bit to see what Rolex has gone through in the development of what otherwise is a fairly simple watch. Other manufacturers make watches that are far more complicated and finely finished, yes, and other brands even make Pepsi bezels in ceramic. But Rolex's standards must be so high that it is so difficult to meet them in this color combination. It's very fascinating. So now let's take an even closer look at this particular watch. Before I continue with this GMT story, and it's about to get really, really interesting, let's take a quick 60 seconds and thank our sponsor, Squarespace. If it hadn't been for Squarespace back 10 years ago when I was building my company, I don't think I would have successfully gotten off the ground. The infrastructure, support, and service and templates that Squarespace gave me as a young entrepreneur to build a site that, while extremely affordable, looked and functioned professionally, is something that I will never not be grateful for. I will never not be vocal about the debt that I feel that I have to Squarespace. Their collection of templates is remarkable. You can pick out a template that you think fits your brand image so quickly and easily and play around. And now with their new fluid engine system, you can drag and drop and edit so quickly, right? Blogs and copy and everything. It's amazing what Squarespace is able to deliver for their clients. I've tried their competitors. Frankly, they were a disaster. Squarespace is my home, and I don't just recommend that you sign up for Squarespace if you're new to business and starting your own new company, but also if you've got a website, you've got a company, it's all going just fine. Head on over to Squarespace and poke around, make an account. I can almost guarantee you that after just a couple of minutes on their website, your sense of the opportunities that are out there is going to be so expanded. You're going to see what Squarespace can do for you in the growth of your business. So if you'd like to head over to Squarespace, go ahead and do it now. Squarespace.com/Theo Harris will get you 10% off your first website or domain. And again, I couldn't recommend this company more. Let's get back into the Rolex GMT Master conversation. This is my personal watch. I bought it a little over a year ago, maybe about 14, 15 months ago, and I absolutely adore it. And I'll tell you why I bought it. Most of you know the story of my affinity for the GMT Master, how that watch represents a connection between my father and I, our, collaborative pursuit of the American dream, my father being a proud owner and wearer of a GMT Master 2 with a Pepsi bezel. But more than that, I think that this watch, independent of my emotional connection to the GMT Master, I think this watch is really one of the few modern collectible Rolexes. This watch is highly unusual with the Mark I bezel and black dial configuration. They still make the Rolex GMT Master Pepsi in white gold. They do it with a blue dial and a meteorite dial. Both of those watches are a little bit more exotic and I think even more expensive than when this watch was produced, well, certainly in the meteorite. But this watch is, indistinguishable from a steel watch. And if there's one thing that we know about the luxury consumer with more money than sense, it's that they just love and they get off on odd little rarities. that the masses necessarily, wouldn't even notice or care about, whatever, right? Because a lot of these consumers, as busy as they may be, and I'm sure that, we can kind of know this casually, they're rather bored and or love to spend their free time researching things that other folks just don't care about. They get excited by these odd little stories, right? And that's a real, I'm not making fun because I fall into the category, right? Being an owner of one. We love to obsess over these obscure pieces of history from what is basically our favorite brand. And it's a great luxury that we have the time and resources, if we allocate them, toward pursuing and studying that hobby. Now, I'm not the sort of person that needs to own everything that they find interesting. I don't have that bone in my body, but this watch I am very proud to own. I really do think that these watches are going to go up quite a bit in value. When I bought mine, when I bought my white gold GMT Master, it wasn't very much more expensive than a stainless steel GMT Master 2 and Pepsi, which is really why I was able to justify it. While when this watch was released at brand new, it was $42,000. I believe that's what my receipt says. I have box and papers. I paid a little over $30,000 when the stainless steel models were 23 and 24 on Chrono 24, right? Now they've gone down a little bit, down into the 2019 area, but that premium I thought was actually quite justified. Insane times make crazy things seem normal. I know that. This is still a ridiculous thing to buy and to own, and it's silly, and it's very, very silly. I don't pretend as if this makes any sense. But that was my market insight at the time, right? And I still stand by it. When you're looking at unusual spaces in the market, places other people aren't looking, there are great opportunities to buy things for prices that I think are much lower than the market will inevitably catch up to and increase, right? So again, I will never sell this watch. This watch represents a great bond between my father and I, but even independent of that emotional element, that emotional facet, I think that this watch, this Mark I black dial, white gold GMT Master 2 is a winner. And I'm not the only one that thinks so. John Mayer and Ben Clymer famously bought matching versions in a Rolex boutique in Manhattan, I believe on Fifth Avenue. It was a story that was told on a Talking Watches episode, and I had my watch when I was watching that episode on a rerun, by the way, but I had forgotten about that little story. And I will tell you that while I'll compliment myself and say that, I was independent-minded enough to buy the watch without someone else's emotional consignment, I did feel good when I remembered, that guys whose opinions I respect, did it as well, right? As independent as I like to be, of course it's cool that someone else agreed, right? There's something very human about being in good company on a decision. It makes you, it mitigates that idea of questioning or any sort of regret or guilt or insecurity, right? It's a silly thing. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you like the Theo and Harris channel, go ahead and like it. I hope that you like what we've done with the studio here. Mike behind the camera has done quite a bit with lighting. And if you want more content from Theo and Harris, go ahead and subscribe to The Zero, which is our Patreon account that we release podcasts and videos every week and behind the scenes access to our opinions about the watch industry, and it's unfiltered. So I hope to see you on over there. And if I do, go ahead and shoot me a DM so I can say hi and we can chat about watches a little bit.